Hey, Julian here from Homer Marketing, and in this video, I'm going to go over some notes that were taken from a private Alex Hormozi presentation, which, by the way, the guy does $200 million a year, and that presentation was on the theory of constraints. Now, if you haven't been growing your business as fast as you'd want to, then these are going to be 3 steps on exactly how you can scale your business as fast as humanly possible, bound by the laws of physics themselves, all right? So tune in for the video. It's going to be pretty cool. Spent a lot of time making this, and I'm sure it's going to help you, and let's get right in. So the actual problem. Now, very simple. Most people are just not working on the right things, right? Like somebody who's trying to improve their sales, but they're already closing 50%, except that they're only doing 5 estimates a month, right? It sounds pretty obvious, but almost everybody does this. And most of the time, we're actually going to be spending too much time on the things that we like to do, right? Like the sales guy just wants to sell more, the painter just wants to paint more, even if those things don't immediately grow the business. Other times it's just going to be, friends that recommend stuff to us and then we do it, right? Like, oh my God, my TikTok ads are doing so great, you should do it too. Or other stuff is going to be random stuff in life. Like all of a sudden AI is this big thing and everybody wants to do it in their business, even if it doesn't actually help them grow faster. And what's crazy is that you probably actually even know what's stopping you, right? And in every business, there's always like these 1 or 2 things that are immediately limiting the growth of your business or the speed of that growth, right? For example, if you can handle 100K of production, but can only book 50K, then your constraint is booking more work. And obviously you'd probably feel that. If you easily book 100K of work, but can only handle 50K of production, then your constraint is production. And you'd likely know that. But the crazy part is that most of you are just ignoring this, right? You know what's limiting you, then why aren't you working more on that? And that's usually because you don't fully understand the importance of the theory of constraint, focus, resource allocation, and short-term sacrifice, which is exactly what I'm going to cover in this video. And don't worry, you're not alone. So my promise to you, since almost every single company that I've worked with has had this problem to some degree and benefited from fully understanding it, if you watch this video all the way to the end and you keep an open mind, I promise you, you will start growing faster. Whatever that number is, whether it's 2 times, 10 times, you will start growing faster in your business or even in life, right? So let's go over part 1, the theory of constraints. Now, what is it? The theory of constraint is a method for identifying the most important limiting factor, the constraint, that stands in the way of achieving a goal, and then systematically improving that constraint until it is no longer the limiting factor, right? Why is it important? Because your constraint is the limiting factor of the business. I'm repeating myself, but still, the only way you're going to grow is by solving these constraints, right? If you can only handle 50K of production, no matter how much work you book, you will be limited to 50K per month, as shown in this graph here, right? No matter how much work I book, I'm still limited by my production. So how do I find my constraint? Well, if you think, what is stopping me from doubling revenue? The first few things that you think about will likely be the constraint. Oh, not enough leads. I wouldn't know how to even get twice the amount of leads. Not enough estimates being booked. Most estimates fall through the crack. My close rate is so low. Because of that, maybe my profit margins are too small, or I don't even have enough crews to take that much work. My crew turnover is too quick. I can't hire fast enough, right? You get the point. And this is where you need to focus, right? You need to have a solid strategy. Now, you need to see yourself as the CEO, right? And as the CEO, you need to allocate resources where they are needed. When I say resources, I'm talking about money and time, right? And your strategy is how you allocate limited resources against unlimited options, right? If you spend time and money in places where they are not immediately needed, your strategy is wrong and you will grow much slower or not at all. For example, a good strategy, this is my constraint. I work on my constraint. I put resources to my constraint, I alleviate it, and there we go. Now more can pass through. A bad strategy is, this thing's not working super well. I improve it, even though my constraint is still down there. It's still the same, right? You get the point. And how do you abuse this? Well, if you focus, or you need to focus, I should say, on solving one constraint after the next. And more specifically, you need to focus on solving the constraint that will have the biggest impact of growth with the lowest relative amount of work. Right? For example, if you're currently closing 10% of your overall estimates, you double the business if you increase that to 20%. And since this isn't that hard to do and has the biggest impact, Therefore, we can call that the lowest hanging fruit, right? And you just need to keep grabbing low hanging fruits over and over again. And you don't want to stop, right? This is actually what business is all about. Like, quick mindset switch for you. It has nothing to do with the day-to-day and everything to do with solving constraints. If you're running your business without constantly focusing on the constraints, you will grow very, very, very slowly. I mean, let that sink in for a second. You constantly, every day of your business should be about solving constraints, nothing else. You shouldn't really be having to care about anything else if you can, right? And here's a little visual, right, that you can also create for yourself. Something that Alex Hormozi says a lot, at least as I took from him, is you need to be reminded more than you need to be taught. So do yourself a favor and kind of draw, something like this to map out your constraint. This is something that I do all the time to remind myself. Right, this way, when I have empty spots in my calendar, I'm like, okay, what do? I pull this up and I'm like, okay, this is my constraint and I should be working more on this. Right. So obviously in most contracting businesses, you're going to have lead generation, estimate scheduling, sales, project management, production, and retention, which is just a fancy way to say getting people to come back when they have more projects and refer their friends and give you reviews so more people see you and want to work with you. Well, it's basically the compounding effect of the business, right? And then within production, you have applicants generation, interviews, onboarding, training, retention, right? So these are all things that could become the bottleneck of your business. And there's even more than that, right? Like, you can make one graph like this for every aspect of this sheet. So do it, like actually do it. This has tremendously helped me just mapping this out. Now, part 2, resource allocation. Now, obviously, the more resources, aka time and money, that you allocate to your constraint, the faster you will grow. Someone who spends an hour versus 7 hours per week on their constraint, that person will grow 7 times slower, of course. So how much time should you allocate? Well, in an ideal world, you're spending 100% of your time on your constraint because that's the thing that actually moves the business forward. However, you probably still need to do some sort of work in the business on a regular basis. So how should you allocate your time? Well, it's pretty simple. Just follow the 3-hour rule. Spend the first 3 to 5 hours of your day on your constraint so you guarantee yourself that every day you're moving the company forward by a little bit at least. How can you do that? Well, you can easily wake up an hour or two earlier and maybe push your day by an hour or two. And the importance of this is that, you could basically double your business if you just start to go from 1 to 2 hours per day working on your constraint, right? So the more time, the better, essentially. And when you actually go and solve the constraint, don't solve it just once, solve it permanently. Put in place systems. For example, if you need painters, sure, you can go ask your current team members for referrals, but that's just not a long-term solution. A good solution would be creating a hiring funnel that you can turn on and off to predictably hire painters. That way, that anytime you need a painter, you just, you have a set process to do it efficiently. Or other times, right, like creating a sales script, you won't need to create a system, right? The sales script is kind of the system. No recurring tasks are required. But other times, like running ads where you need to film creatives, edit them, manage the ads, on a weekly, constant basis, well, that's going to require recurring systems, right? Because you need to do work on a recurring basis. So just keep that in mind too. You want to permanently solve it. So create systems, whether it's recurring or non-recurring systems. Any alternatives? Well, you could hire somebody who's already done it. If you have the money to invest, you can fast track pretty much any constraint by hiring somebody who's already solved that constraint in another similar company, right? For example, you can hire a marketing director in another painting company to come in your company and implement the systems to fix your lack of leads, which they obviously would have already done before. Now, if they have 10 years of experience, by paying them to come into your company to solve your problems, well, even if you have to pay them $100K per year, you're basically buying 10 years of your life back, right? And objectively, that's extremely worth it since 10 years of mistakes probably costs a lot more than $100K. And obviously, you never get your time back, so that's invaluable. So you should see it that way too, right? Especially if you have the money. And there is obviously going to be a special way of finding these people, right? They're probably not going to be in LinkedIn most of the time looking for a job. But I'm not going to go into that in this video since it kind of deserves a video on its own. But this should be kind of last resort, especially if you're below like 1 million, 2 million. I wouldn't really recommend this. And of course, coaching, right? Once you know what your constraint is, obviously you need to know how to solve it, right? And if you don't, then paying for coaching and consulting is objectively the fastest way to get the required knowledge. And the cost of the mistakes you will avoid by paying for coaching massively outweighs the cost of the coaching itself 99% of the time, right? Kind of let that sink in. Or if you know other successful people in the industry, you can also potentially ask them to buy their resources, like their sales script, their training, and whatever else. Especially if they aren't competing with you directly, right? AKA they're like on the other side of the country or something. They will probably gladly help you, if you're nice, of course, and for some money. Now, part 3, sacrifice. Probably my favorite part. Now, the problem you're probably, having here is that you don't have any time, right? You're thinking, I know what my constraint is. I know what I need to do, and I know how long it's going to take me, but I just don't have any time. And immediately I know what you're going to be thinking, right? You have no time. You can't possibly free up more time because you're already working 16 hours a day. And if you forced yourself to free more time, that would mean that your revenue would have to go down because you wouldn't be doing as many estimates, or you wouldn't be there to supervise all your job sites, yada, 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 yada. Now, to make it easier to understand the solution to this, I want to use the money printer analogy, right? So imagine that you have a machine, a printer that prints $1 bills, right? You just finished building it, and you turn it on at 100% capacity because you're so excited that you finally built the money printer. But then really quickly, you realize that managing the whole machine takes 100% of your time and energy. You now have no time left to improve the machine so that maybe it can even start printing $5 bills, which is, a lot more valuable than just $1 bills. And the worst part is that, you are only printing a dollar bill. So it'll take you years to start making the millions that you want to make. So what do? Do you keep the printer running? Or do you turn it off temporarily to work on improving it so that you can start printing $5 bills and get to your goal faster? You'd probably turn it off, right? So let's say that the improvements take you a month. You'd think that it's worth it to sacrifice printing $1 bills for a month only to then be able to print $5 bills, right? You think that'd be worth it. That's pretty interesting. What does this have to do with business? Well, if you have no time, it's because you're running your business at 100% capacity or very close to. So you're stuck making $500K a year because you have no time to actually improve the business to get past that. The sacrifice that you have to make is to dial back your business, aka put the printer at 50% or 80% of its capacity, so that you now have the time to improve the business and therefore make more money. And you said it was worth it to maybe put the printer on the back burner while you improve it to print more money. So why won't you do the same with your business, right? On the flip side, if you don't dial back your business, you're actually sacrificing, potentially making twice the revenue and having more free time just to avoid the fear of having to dial it back temporarily and make a little bit less money. Which, if you put it that way, it sounds pretty stupid, right? And I'm not crazy. You can actually mathematically prove that this sacrifice is worth it, right? So let's go, with a simple example here for ease of explanation. Let's say, assuming that you can only work 100 hours per month, right? That's the max amount of time that you can put in your business. And a $1 million business, to run it at $1 million, it takes 100 hours. So you could kind of say that every hour worked on the business is worth 10K. You'll see where I'm going with this. And the constraint for you to get to 2 million takes 100 hours to solve, right? So you're currently spending 100 hours a month running your $1 million business, and you want to get to 2 million, and you know that that's going to take 100 hours to free up. So obviously you're going to have to sacrifice something, right? So let's go with 2 examples here, and let's try to think of who will make the most money in the next 12 months, just the next 12 months. Person number 1 is going to spend 10 hours a month on their constraint, right? So it's going to take them about 10 months to solve the constraint. That means that during those 10 months, they'll only be spending 90 hours on their business, which means that, 90 hours, that equates to 900K. So they're going to be running their business at 90% efficiency. They're going to be making 900K, and ultimately that sounds pretty good. They're making great money. Person 2, however, they're, impatient. They want to get this solved as quickly as possible. So they spend 50 hours a month on their constraint. What does that mean? That means that they solve it within 2 months. And obviously during those 2 months, they're only spending 50 hours on the business, so their business is only generating 500K of revenue. Hope you're following me this far. Now, who do you think will make the most amount of money in the next 12 months? Well, this is what person one's graph looks like. Month 1, they're at $1 million. Month 2, they start solving their constraint for 10 months. Then they solve it and they get to 2 million the next month. And this is person 2. They're at 1 million. They go down to 500K for 2 months. And then all of the rest of the months of the year are at 2 million in revenue. Is it really that hard to tell who's doing the most amount of money after 12 months? Because that's what it looks like. Revenue after 12 months, person 1 has done 12 million. Right, 12 million, the sum of all of this, 12 million over the first 12 months. And person 2 has done 20 million. Person 2 made 8 million more than person 1. That's interesting because they actually both sacrificed $1 million to free up 100 hours of their time to solve the constraint, right? Because 1 hour equal 10K, so 100 hours equal $1 million. And you can see this right here. They sacrificed 1 million to get to 2 million, right? Because 500K on month 2, month 3, that's 1 million. Same thing over here. 10 months of 100K sacrifice, that's $1 million. They both sacrifice the same amount of money. The difference is that person 2 spread his 100 hours over 2 months instead of over 10 months. He made a short-term sacrifice, right? Short-term sacrifice because he knew that the faster he solved his constraint, the more earning potential he had. AKA the faster he would be making 2 million. And you could argue that if he spent 1 month at 0 revenue, it would have been even more, right? But realistically, because he's a smart cookie, person 2 continued to free up 50 hours every month to work on the next constraint, unlocking more and more revenue every 2 months, right? And in this example, we're assuming that every constraint takes 100 hours to solve and unlocks $1 million of revenue. So if he's a smart cookie, over the first 12 months, he's actually unlocked $27 million of total revenue, which is arguably, or not even arguably, it's just objectively a lot more than 12 million, right? So you can see, sacrificed 50% of his business to have 50% of his time back to grow the business. Same, now he's back at what he was before, but then he went up again, and so on and so on. And now he's at 5 million. He's 5x the business over a year compared to Joe Blow here who, 2x'd it. And what does this mean? Well, if you're currently working 16 hours a day, doing 500K a year, to get to the next level, you need to sacrifice some of your revenue to have the time back to fix the constraint and of course unlock more revenue. And since the revenue you'll have to sacrifice will be the same, right? Just like in this example, they both had to sacrifice $1 million, right? Since the sacrifice of revenue will have to be the same, regardless of if you take a month or a year or 10 years, you might as well get it over with as soon as humanly possible. It's always going to be a short-term sacrifice over a long-term sacrifice because a short-term sacrifice will get more long-term benefit even if it hurts in the short term. And bonus here, once you've sacrificed your revenue and opened up 3 to 5 hours per day to work on the constraint, well, don't go back after you've solved your first constraint. Make it a habit to always work on your constraint, whatever it is, for 3 to 5 hours per day, right? Do this, keep working on your constraint, keep opening free time to grow the company, not this. Don't close up your time again. And if it wasn't already clear enough, the whole reason why you aren't growing faster is because you're not putting more time towards growth. The more time you put towards growth, the faster you will grow. And that's why making this sacrifice, going back from 500K a year to 3 or 400K a year is ultimately a positive sacrifice if you see that doing that is going to allow you to get to 1 million. Because think about it this way, every year you're not doing $1 million, you're losing $1 million. So in reality, whatever your goal is, you're sacrificing the difference between the revenue you're at right now and your revenue goal every single year, not achieving it. So that's it for me. Hope that you found this video valuable. Feel free to leave a comment if you have questions, stuff like that. I always answer all the comments and stuff. And I'll see you in the next one.